The auctioneer's gavel came down with a crack that echoed across the village square, and Kade Brennan watched his only draft horse walk away with a grain merchant from 2 counties over. 2 years he had saved for that mare, 2 years of breaking his back behind a borrowed plow, and now she was gone because the merchant bid 3 silver more than Kade could scrape together. He stood there with empty hands and dirt under his fingernails, watching his future pull someone else's cart down the road, and felt the particular hollow ache of a man who has worked himself raw for nothing. The bond auction came next. Kade should have left. He had no use for an indentured servant and no money left to buy one anyway. But his feet would not move, and so he stood at the edge of the crowd while the auctioneer brought out a young orc woman in a hemp shift that had gone gray from too many washings. She kept her chin up and her eyes forward, not looking at the men who assessed her like livestock. Her skin was the deep green of summer moss, and her tusks were small and neat, barely visible when her mouth was closed. Someone in the crowd muttered something about greenskin labor being worth half a human's, and the auctioneer started the bidding low. No one bid. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and mean. The auctioneer cleared his throat and dropped the price. Still nothing. Kade saw the woman's jaw tighten, saw the way her hands curled into fists at her sides, and something in his chest twisted sideways. The auctioneer was starting to look annoyed, calling out a price that was barely more than a good wool coat, when Kade heard his own voice say, "Here." He did not remember deciding to speak. He did not remember walking forward or pulling out the last of his coin, the handful of silver and copper he had meant to use for seed grain. The auctioneer looked surprised but took the money quickly, as if afraid Kade might come to his senses. A clerk pushed a rolled paper into Kade's hands, the indenture contract with its seals and signatures. And suddenly, the orc woman was standing in front of him with her eyes slightly wider than before, trying to understand what had just happened. Kade looked down at the paper in his hands. 7 years of bond service. He looked at the woman, at the careful blankness of her expression, and felt something hot and angry rise in his throat. The auctioneer was already calling for the next lot. Kade took the indenture contract, held it up so the woman could see, and tore it in half. Then he tore it again and again, until it was just scraps of parchment falling like snow onto the dirt. "What are you doing?" the auctioneer sputtered. "That is a legal document. You cannot just—" "I can do whatever I want with my own property," Kade said, and the word tasted like poison in his mouth. "And I choose to destroy it. She is free." He turned and walked away before anyone could argue, before he could think too hard about what he had just done with money he could not afford to lose. He made it to the edge of the square before he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. The orc woman was following him, keeping a careful distance but definitely following. "You do not have to," Kade said. "You are free. You can go anywhere you want." She stopped, her brow furrowed. "Go where, I do not know. Anywhere. You are not bound anymore." "I have no papers," she said. Her voice was lower than he expected, calm and steady. "No free papers, no travel permit. If the magistrate's men find me on the road without documents, they will assume I am a runaway and sell me again, probably for less than you paid." Kade had not thought of that. He should have thought of that. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly exhausted. "What is your name?" "Tarna Greyrock, Kade Brennan. I have a farm 2 miles west. It is not much. 1 room, a loft, a few fields. You can stay there if you need to, until you figure out what you want to do." She studied him for a long moment, and he had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing straight through to all the foolish, impulsive parts of him he tried to keep hidden. Finally, she nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. "All right." They walked in silence. Kade's farm was small even by frontier standards. a patch of cleared land with a cabin his grandfather had built 40 years ago, and fields that fought him for every handful of grain. Without the draft horse, he did not know how he was going to plow come spring, but that was a problem for another day. Right now he was trying to figure out what to say to the orc woman walking 3 paces behind him and coming up empty. "Why did you do that?" Tarna asked when they were a mile from the village. "Tear the papers." Kade did not have a good answer. "It was wrong," he said finally. "The whole thing, people are not property. The law says otherwise. Then the law is wrong." She made a soft sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something else. They walked the rest of the way without speaking. The cabin looked even smaller than usual when Kade saw it through her eyes. One room with a hearth and a table and not much else. A ladder to the sleeping loft. A well outside and a vegetable garden gone to weeds. He had let things slide while he was saving for the horse, telling himself he would fix the sagging shutters and the loose boards once he had proper equipment. Now he just felt ashamed. "It is not much," he said. "It has a roof," Tarna said, "and walls. That is more than some." Kade showed her where the well was, where he kept the food, the small barn where a few chickens scratched in the dirt. "I sleep in the loft," he said. "You can have the main room. There are blankets in the chest." "Where will you sleep then?" "The loft," I just said. "You just said I could have the main room." "Yes, and I will be in the loft. It is fine." She gave him a look he could not quite read. "That is not how indenture usually works." "You are not indentured," Kade said, more sharply than he meant to. "You can do what you want, sleep where you want, leave if you want. I am not your master." "Then what are you?" He did not have an answer to that either. "I am going to check the fields," he said, and fled before she could ask anything else. He stayed out until the sun was setting, walking the same paths he walked every day, checking plants that did not need checking. When he finally went back, there was a thin line of smoke rising from the chimney and the smell of something cooking. He stopped in the doorway. Tarna had found his stores of dried beans and turnips and made a stew that was surprisingly good. She had also swept the floor and straightened the books on the shelf and done the dishes he had been meaning to wash for 3 days. "You did not have to do that," Kade said. Tarna shrugged. "I was here. The work needed doing." They ate in awkward silence. Kade was painfully aware of every sound he made, every scrape of the spoon against the bowl. Tarna ate neatly and efficiently and did not look at him. "What did you do before?" Kade asked finally. "Before the bond auction." "I was apprenticed to a bone setter." "My father was a trader, small goods, nothing fancy. He died last winter, fever." "I am sorry," she nodded, not looking up from her bowl. 3 weeks after he died, a man came to the house. Said my father had signed an indenture for me to pay off debts. I told him my father had no debts. He showed me papers with my father's mark on them. I did not know what to do. He had 2 men with him. They took me to the bond broker's yard and locked me in until the auction. Kade felt the anger return, hot and sharp. "That is illegal. You cannot indenture someone for another person's debt." "Apparently you can if you have the right papers." "Did you try to fight it?" "Go to the magistrate." "I am an orc," Tarna said flatly. "The magistrate is human. The bond broker is human. Who do you think he would believe?" Kade had no answer to that. He finished his stew in silence, and when he was done, Tarna took his bowl and washed it without being asked. He wanted to tell her to stop, that she did not need to serve him, but he did not know how to say it without sounding like he was giving her orders. "Thank you for dinner," he said instead. "You are welcome." He climbed up to the loft and lay awake for a long time, listening to the small sounds of Tarna settling in below. He had bought her. He had torn up the papers, yes, but he had bought her first, and that fact sat in his stomach like a stone. He told himself he had done the right thing, that leaving her at the auction would have been worse. but it did not make him feel any better. The days developed a rhythm. Kade woke before dawn and worked the fields with hand tools, breaking his back to do the work a horse should do. Tarna kept the house and the garden, cooked meals that were better than anything Kade had managed on his own, and did not ask questions. They were polite to each other, carefully polite, like strangers sharing a road. A week passed. Then too, Kade went into the village for supplies and felt eyes on him the whole time. The blacksmith asked him how his new servant was working out, with a tone that made Kade's hands curl into fists. He said she was not a servant and left before he could say something he would regret. When he got home, Tarna was in the garden, pulling weeds with steady efficiency. She had tied her dark hair back with a strip of cloth, and there was dirt on her hands and a smudge on her cheek. Kade watched her for a moment before he realized what he was doing and looked away, his face heating. The blacksmith's wife twisted her ankle, Tarna said that evening over dinner. I saw her hobbling yesterday. If you have cloth for a wrap, I could help. You do not have to, Kade said automatically. I know I do not have to, I want to. I was trained for this. People might not want an orc touching them. Tarna's expression went carefully neutral. Probably true, Kade felt like an ass. I did not mean it like that. I just meant they are idiots, some of them. I do not want you to get hurt. I have been hurt before. I will likely be hurt again. That is not a reason to stop helping people. The next day, Kade brought cloth for bandages and willow bark for the pain, and Tarna walked to the blacksmith's house. She was gone for 2 hours. When she came back, she did not say anything, but her shoulders were tight and her jaw was set. Did they let you help? Kade asked, eventually, after the wife tried standing on it and nearly fainted from the pain. Tarna began preparing dinner with sharp, precise movements. She will be fine in a few days if she stays off it. I left instructions. Did they pay you? No. They should have paid you. I did not ask for payment. You should have. You have a skill. You should be compensated for it. Tarna turned to look at him, something unreadable in her eyes. Why do you care? Because it is right, Kade said. Because you deserve to be treated fairly. I am an orc. So the world does not work that way. Maybe it should. She stared at him for another moment, then turned back to the pot on the fire. You are a strange person, Kade Brennan. They did not speak much for the rest of the evening, but the silence felt different somehow. Less like strangers and more like two people who were trying to figure each other out. Spring slid into summer. The blacksmith's wife healed, and she must have told someone, because a farmer showed up a week later with a son who had broken his arm falling from a tree. Tarna set the bone with calm competence while the boy cried, and his father watched with suspicion that slowly turned to grudging respect. The farmer tried to pay her with a chicken. Tarna accepted it, and that night she and Kade had roast chicken for the first time in months. You should charge more, Kade said. A broken bone is worth more than one chicken. It is a start, Tarna said. More people came. A woman with a fever, a child with a bad cough, an old man with joints so swollen he could barely walk. Tarna helped all of them, and slowly, a few coins started to appear on the table. Not many and not often, but enough that Kade could see her posture change, see her stand a little straighter. He was falling in love with her, and he did not know what to do about it. It happened in small moments. The way she hummed while she worked, low and tuneless. The way she laughed when one of his chickens escaped and led her on a chase around the yard, a real laugh that lit up her whole face. The way she listened when he talked about his plans for the farm, nodding in the right places, asking questions that showed she was really paying attention. He did not say anything. How could he? He had bought her, even if he had freed her immediately. She stayed because she had nowhere else to go, not because she wanted to be here. Anything he said would just be another kind of cage. So he kept his mouth shut and tried not to stare, and told himself he was doing the right thing. Summer reached its peak, and with it came a visitor Kade had not expected. A man in expensive clothes rode up to the cabin on a fine horse, with a clerk trailing behind him on a mule. Kade was in the field, and he watched them approach with a sinking feeling in his gut. Kade Brennan. The man called. "Yes, my name is Horace Venn. I am the bond broker who arranged the sale of the orc girl Tarna Greyrock. I am here to inform you that you are being sued for destruction of legal property." Kade's blood went cold. "What?" "The indenture contract you destroyed was a legally binding document. By destroying it, you have rendered the bond unenforceable and cost me considerable money. I am seeking compensation for the full value of the bond, plus damages." "That is insane. I bought her. She was mine to free." "You bought the bond, not the girl. The bond still had 7 years remaining. At fair market value, that is worth substantially more than what you paid at auction." Tarna had come out of the cabin. She stood in the doorway, very still, her face unreadable. Venn glanced at her and smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression. "You should have read the contract before you tore it up, Mr. Brennan. A man's sentiment is no match for the law." "Get off my land," Kade said. "I will see you at the magistrate's court," Venn said. "You have been formally notified." "The hearing is set for 3 weeks from today." He rode away, the clerk scurrying after him. Kade stood there with his hands shaking, watching them go. "You should settle," Tarna said quietly from the doorway. "What? Give him what he wants. I can go back to the bond yard." "It is not worth losing everything you have." "No," Kade said. The word came out harder than he meant it to. "Absolutely not." "Kade, no," he repeated. He walked over to her, stopped a few feet away. "I am not letting him take you. We will fight this." "How?" "You said it yourself. You have no money. You cannot afford a lawyer." "Then I will represent myself." "You do not know the law." "I will learn." She looked at him like he was insane, and maybe he was. But the thought of her going back to that bond yard, of standing on an auction block again while men bid on her like she was livestock, made him feel physically ill. "Why?" Tarna asked. "Why would you do this?" "Because I love you," he thought. "Because the idea of losing you makes it hard to breathe. Because you laugh at my chickens and hum while you cook, and you are the best thing that has ever happened to me." "Because it is right," he said. She searched his face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there made her expression soften slightly. "You are going to lose everything," she said. "Maybe, but I am going to try." The next 3 weeks were the longest of Kade's life. He borrowed law books from the village priest, who looked at him with pity but did not ask questions. He read until his eyes burned, trying to understand statutes and precedents and legal language that seemed designed to confuse. Tarna helped when she could, reading over his shoulder, pointing out things that did not make sense. "Here," she said one night, tapping a passage. "It says the bond is only valid if the indenture was entered into willingly. I did not enter into anything willingly." "Can you prove that?" "No, it is my word against Venn's paperwork." Kade swore and flipped to another page. The more he read, the worse it looked. Venn had the law on his side. He had documents, witnesses, precedent. Kade had righteous anger and not much else. "There has to be something," he muttered. "Kade." Tarna's hand settled on his shoulder, warm and solid. "You should settle, I mean it. I do not want you to lose everything because of me." "It would not be because of you, it would be because of him." "That does not change the outcome." He looked up at her. She was so close he could see the faint freckles on her nose, the exact shade of green in her eyes. His hand came up without his permission, almost touched her cheek, then dropped. "I cannot," he said quietly. "I cannot just let you go." Something shifted in her expression. "Kade, I know," he said quickly, before she could say anything else. I know you only stayed because you had nowhere else to go. I know you do not owe me anything, but I am asking you to let me fight for you anyway, please." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded once and went back to reading. They did not talk about it again, but something had changed between them. Tarna's hand would brush his when she passed him a book. She sat closer to him at the table. Once he looked up and caught her watching him, and she did not look away. The hearing was held in the village meeting hall, with Magistrate Aldrich presiding. He was an old man with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness, which Kade hoped was true. Then arrived with a lawyer, a thin man with a pinched face who laid out documents on the table like weapons. Kade had his borrowed books and a sheaf of notes that suddenly seemed pathetic in comparison. "Mr. Venn," the magistrate said, "present your case." The lawyer stood. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of property destruction. Mr. Brennan purchased an indenture bond at a legal auction. Said bond had 7 years remaining on its term. Rather than honor the bond, Mr. Brennan destroyed the physical contract, rendering it unenforceable and causing my client significant financial harm. We are seeking restitution for the full value of the bond, calculated at the market rate for 7 years of skilled labor, plus damages for loss of business." "How much?" the magistrate asked. 40 gold pieces." Kade's heart sank. He did not have 40 gold pieces. He did not have 4 gold pieces. He would have to sell the farm to pay that, and even then it might not be enough. "Mr. Brennan," the magistrate said, "your response." Kade stood, his notes crumpling in his sweating hands. "Your Honor, I did purchase the bond. But I purchased it specifically to free Miss Greyrock. The indenture was fraudulent from the start. She was bonded to pay debts that did not exist, with papers that I believe were forged." Venn's lawyer smiled. "Does Mr. Brennan have any proof of this allegation?" "Not yet, but then it is speculation and hearsay. The bond was properly registered with the clerk's office and bore the mark of Miss Greyrock's father, who is conveniently deceased and cannot testify otherwise. Without proof of forgery, the bond is presumed legitimate." "Even if the bond was legitimate," Kade said desperately, "the law says an indenture must be entered into willingly. Miss Greyrock did not consent. Her father consented on her behalf, as was his legal right. He was dead. He could not have consented to anything. Proof, Mr. Brennan." "Do you have any?" Kade looked at Tarna. She sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, her face carefully blank. He looked back at the magistrate. "No." "Then I am afraid," the magistrate began. The door banged open. A woman rushed in, red-faced and breathing hard. "Magistrate Aldrich, I apologize for the interruption, but there is a fever in the lower village. We need the orc healer." Everyone turned to stare at Tarna. She stood slowly. "How many sick?" "5 so far, maybe more by now. The children are hit worst." Tarna looked at the magistrate. "May I be excused?" Aldrich frowned. "This is a legal proceeding, Miss Greyrock. I cannot simply—" "People are dying," Tarna said flatly. "Are we doing this instead of helping them?" The magistrate looked at Venn, at Kade, at the woman in the doorway. "We will adjourn until tomorrow," he said. "Miss Greyrock, go." Tarna went. Kade followed her without thinking. Behind him he heard Venn's lawyer objecting, but he did not care. Tarna was already halfway down the street, moving fast, and he had to jog to catch up. "What do you need?" he asked. "Willow bark for the fever, clean cloth. Boiled water, honey if anyone has it." "I will get it." They worked through the night. The fever was bad, the kind that turned children's skin hot as coals and made them shake with chills. Tarna moved from house to house, calm and competent, bringing down fevers and making sure the sick ones drank enough water. Kade hauled water and boiled it and fetched supplies, doing whatever Tarna told him to do. He saw the way people looked at her, suspicious at first, then grateful. He saw a mother clutch Tarna's hand and thank her with tears streaming down her face after Tarna brought her daughter's fever down from the danger point. The fever spread. By the second day, there were 15 sick. By the third day, 20. Tarna slept in snatches, an hour here and there, and then went back to work. Kade tried to make her rest and she ignored him. He stopped trying and just made sure she ate and drank. "You are going to collapse," he said on the fourth day. "Then I will collapse. These people need help." "They have help. You have been doing this for 4 days straight. And I will keep doing it until the fever breaks." She swayed on her feet. Kade caught her elbow, steadied her. "Tarna, I am fine." "You are not fine. You are exhausted." "I am an orc," she said. "We are stronger than humans. I can handle it. Being strong does not mean you have to do everything alone." She looked up at him, and for a moment he saw past the wall she kept up, saw how tired she really was. "I have to," she said quietly. "I have to prove I am worth something, that I can contribute. Otherwise, why would anyone let me stay?" "You do not have to prove anything to me," Kade said. "Maybe I have to prove it to myself." She pulled away and went back to work. Kade watched her go, his chest aching. The fever finally broke on the 7th day. No one had died, which Tarna said was close to a miracle. The village was exhausted and grateful in equal measure. People started bringing gifts, small things mostly, eggs and bread, and once a bolt of cloth that made Tarna's eyes go wide. "I cannot accept this," she told the weaver who brought it. "You saved my grandson," the old woman said. "You will take the cloth and be grateful." Tarna took the cloth. The magistrate postponed the hearing twice more while the village recovered. When it finally reconvened, the meeting hall was packed. Kade did not know why so many people had come until the magistrate called the session to order and a man stood up in the back. "Your Honor, I would like to testify." It was the blacksmith. Aldrich frowned. "This is not a criminal trial, Mr. Garrett. I am not taking testimony." "Then I am speaking as a witness to character. That orc woman saved my wife from weeks of pain when she hurt her ankle, set it proper and gave us instructions for healing, did not ask for a penny." "That is not relevant to the case at hand," Ven's lawyer said. Another person stood, the weaver. "She saved my grandson's life. The fever would have taken him without her." Another, the farmer whose son had broken his arm. "She has more skill in her little finger than most doctors have in their whole body, and she treats everyone the same, does not matter if they are rich or poor." More people stood. One after another, a wave of them, all with stories of Tarna helping them or their families. Kade stared. Tarna sat very still, her eyes bright. "This is highly irregular," Ven's lawyer said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Magistrate Aldrich held up a hand. "I have heard enough. Sit down, all of you." He waited until the hall was quiet again. "Mr. Ven, I have a question for you. You claim this indenture bond was legitimate, entered into by Miss Greyrock's father to pay debts. Can you produce evidence of these debts?" "The debts were settled by the bond itself, Your Honor. There would be no remaining record." "Convenient. Can you produce the original agreement signed by the father?" "It was a verbal contract, recorded by my clerk." "Also convenient. And where is this clerk now?" "He left my employment some months ago. I do not know his current whereabouts." Aldrich leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard. "Mr. Ven, I have been a magistrate for 30 years. I know a fraudulent bond when I see one. This has all the hallmarks. A conveniently dead debtor, no records, a missing clerk. And you have the gall to come into my court and demand 40 gold pieces based on this. Your Honor, the bond was properly registered by your clerk who has now vanished." "Mr. Brennan, did you keep any of the torn pieces of the contract?" Kade blinked. "Yes, Your Honor, some of them." "Bring them to me." Kade had stuffed the scraps into his pocket that day at the auction, meaning to throw them away and never quite getting around to it. He pulled them out now, smoothed and crumpled, and handed them to the magistrate. Aldrich examined them carefully, holding one piece up to the light. "Mr. Venn, did your clerk have access to official seals and stamps?" "Of course. It was part of his duties." "Then I suggest you find him. Because this signature does not match any of the legitimate documents I have on file from traders in this region. I believe it was traced. Badly." Venn's face went red. "Your Honor, you cannot simply, 'I can and I am.' This case is dismissed. Furthermore, I am opening an investigation into your business practices, Mr. Venn. If I find evidence that you have been manufacturing false indentures, you will face criminal charges. Get out of my courtroom." The hall erupted. Venn was sputtering protests. His lawyer was trying to cite precedents, but Aldrich's gavel came down like thunder and silenced them all. Out, they left. The hall stayed loud, people talking and laughing and clapping Kade on the back as he walked toward Tarna. She stood slowly, looking dazed. "It is over," she said. "It is over." She swayed. Kade caught her, and this time she did not pull away. She leaned into him, her forehead resting against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arms around her and held on. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved yourself," Kade said. "All those people you helped, they saved you. You started it, you bought me, you freed me. I could not do anything else." She pulled back just enough to look up at him. Her eyes were wet. Why, he could lie. He could say it was the right thing to do, that anyone would have done the same. All the things he had been telling himself for months. But he was tired of lying, and she was looking at him like she already knew the answer and just needed him to say it. "Because I love you," he said. "I have loved you since you laughed at my chickens. Maybe before that. I know I have no right. I know you only stayed because you had nowhere else to go, but that is the truth. I love you, and I could not let them take you away." Tarna stared at him. The hall had gone quiet around them, everyone watching, but Kade could not bring himself to care. "You thought I stayed because I had nowhere else to go," Tarna said finally. "Did you not? At first, maybe. But Kade, I could have left any time in the last 4 months. I could have walked to the next village, the next town, found work as a healer. I stayed because I wanted to stay. I stayed because you made me feel like a person instead of a thing. I stayed because I was falling in love with you and I did not know how to tell you." Kade's brain stopped working. "What?" Tarna laughed, the sound shaky and bright. "I love you too, you idiot. I have been trying to figure out how to say it for weeks." "Oh," Kade said. Then, because his brain was still not working properly, "Really, really." He kissed her. It was clumsy and graceless and the best thing he had ever done. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, and the hall erupted into applause and whistles. They broke apart, both of them red-faced, and Kade started to laugh. Tarna was laughing too, and then they were both just standing there grinning at each other like fools while the whole village watched. "Get a room," someone yelled, and that just made them laugh harder. They walked home hand in hand. The cabin looked the same as always, small and shabby, but it felt different now. It felt like theirs. "What do we do now?" Tarna asked. "I do not know," Kade admitted. "I have never been in love before. Neither have I." They stood there for a moment, both of them awkward and uncertain. Then Kade said, "I should probably court you properly, bring you flowers and things. I would like that. And eventually, if you wanted, we could get married, but only if you want to, no pressure." "Kade, yes, stop babbling." She kissed him again, slower this time, and Kade forgot what he was going to say. When they finally broke apart, she was smiling. "I think we can figure it out," she said. Summer turned to autumn. Magistrate Aldrich's investigation found Venn's clerk in the next county, living under a false name. Under questioning, the clerk confessed to forging indenture bonds for Venn. using traced signatures and stolen seals. He had created at least 20 false bonds over the past 5 years, selling people who had no legal obligation to serve. Venn was arrested, tried, and convicted. All of his bonds were declared void, and the people he had illegally indentured were freed. Tarna cried when she heard. Kade held her and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would make it better. 20 people. 20 lives stolen and sold because of one man's greed. They are free now, he said finally. That is what matters. It does not give them back the years they lost. No, but they have the rest of their lives because of you. She looked at him, her eyes red. What? If you had not been there, if you had not helped during the fever, Venn would have won. I would have had to pay him, and all those other bonds would still be legal. You broke the whole thing open. I was just trying to help sick people. And you did. You helped more people than you know. She leaned into him, and they sat there in the quiet of the cabin, watching the fire burn low. Autumn brought the harvest, such as it was. Kade's fields produced less than he needed, and he knew the winter was going to be lean. But Tarna's healing practice was growing. People came from neighboring villages now, bringing coins and goods in trade. She was building a reputation, and with it, a livelihood. We should make a proper space for you, Kade said one evening. A place where people can come for treatment. The cabin is too small. We could build a room onto the side, Tarna said thoughtfully. Nothing fancy, just enough for a table and shelves for supplies. I am a terrible carpenter. Then we will hire someone. I can pay for it. You do not have to, Kade. She took his hand. Let me contribute, please. This is my home too. He squeezed her fingers. All right. They hired the village carpenter, a taciturn man named Elias who did good work and did not ask questions about why a human man and an orc woman were living together. He built them a small addition to the cabin, one room with a high window for light and sturdy shelves along one wall. Tarna filled it with jars of herbs and rolled bandages and all the tools of her trade. She painted a sign, simple and neat, with her name and the word bonesetter beneath it. Should we put healer instead? Kade asked. You do more than just set bones. Bonesetter is what I was trained as, Tarna said. It feels right. They hung the sign beside the door on a cold morning in late autumn. Tarna stood back and looked at it for a long time, her expression unreadable. What are you thinking? Kade asked. That I never thought I would have this, a place of my own, a skill I can use freely, someone who... She trailed off, her cheeks darkening to a deeper green. Someone who loves you, Kade finished. Yes. He put an arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him, solid and warm. They stood there together, looking at the sign with her name on it, and Kade thought about all the things that had to happen to get them to this moment. The auction, the torn papers, the lawsuit, the fever. 1,000 tiny choices and chances that could have gone differently. You ever think about what would have happened if I had not gone to the auction that day? He asked, sometimes. What do you think would have happened? Someone else would have bought me eventually, maybe someone worse. Or maybe no one would have bought me at all and Venn would have sent me to a work camp. She turned to look at him. Why do you ask? I just want to make sure this is what you want, that you are here because you want to be, not because you feel obligated. Kade Brennan, I have told you a dozen times that I love you. What else do I need to say to convince you? I know. I worry that I took advantage somehow, that I used the situation to... She kissed him, cutting off the words. When she pulled back, she looked exasperated and fond in equal measure. You are an idiot. A sweet idiot, but an idiot. I stayed because of you. I stay because of you. Not because I have nowhere else to go, not because I owe you anything, but because I love you and I want to build a life with you. Is that clear enough? Yes, Kade said. Sorry, stop apologizing. Sore, he caught himself. Right. She shook her head, smiling, and went back inside to organize her new workspace. Kade stayed outside a moment longer, looking at the sign in the cabin and the fields stretching out beyond. It was not much, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. Winter came early that year, with snow in the first week of the new season. Kade had been right about the harvest being lean, but Tarna's work brought in enough to make up the difference. They had enough food, enough firewood, enough of everything that mattered. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Kade had been thinking about marriage since the autumn, but he did not know how to ask. He had never proposed to anyone before. He did not have a ring or money for a fancy celebration. He was just a farmer with a small plot of land and debts he was still paying off. But Tarna deserved more than that. She deserved someone who could give her the world, not just a drafty cabin and an uncertain future. "You are brooding again," Tarna said one evening. "I am not brooding. You are staring into the fire like it holds the secrets of the universe. That is brooding." Kade sighed. "I have been thinking." "About what?" "The future. Us." She set down the shirt she was mending and looked at him fully. "What about us?" "I want to marry you," Kade said. The words came out in a rush, graceless and blunt. "I know I do not have much to offer, and I know we have only been together a few months, but I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me." Tarna was quiet for a moment, then she said, "That was possibly the least romantic proposal I have ever heard. I know. I am sorry. I am terrible at this." "I did not say I disliked it." Kade looked up. She was smiling, soft and warm. "So is that a yes?" "It is a yes, you fool. Of course I will marry you." He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. She laughed and held him tight, and Kade felt something in his chest settle. A piece of himself he had not known was missing, clicking into place. "When?" he asked. "Whenever you want. Tomorrow. Next year, I do not care." "The spring fair," Kade said. "That is when people usually do it, right?" "Big celebration, the whole village." "You want the whole village there?" "I want everyone to know you are mine, if that is all right with you." "More than all right." They told people the next day, and the news spread through the village like wildfire. There were some who disapproved, of course. An orc and a human getting married was still unusual, still scandalous in some circles. But most people were happy for them, or at least polite enough to fake it. The blacksmith's wife gave Tarna fabric for a dress. The weaver offered to make it. The priest said he would officiate and looked genuinely pleased to be asked. Slowly, despite all the reasons it should not work, the village was starting to accept them. Winter was long and cold, but it did not feel that way to Kade. He had Tarna beside him every night, warm and solid, and that made even the darkest days bearable. They talked about the future, about what they wanted to build together. Tarna wanted to expand her practice, maybe take on an apprentice someday. Kade wanted to improve the farm, buy that plow horse he had lost, make the land productive enough to support them both. "We could have children," Tarna said one night, her voice carefully casual. Kade's heart skipped. "Do you want children? Someday, maybe. If you do." "I do," Kade said. "I really do." She smiled and nestled closer, and they fell asleep tangled together, dreaming of a future that was starting to feel real. Spring came with a rush of warmth and new growth. The fields turned green, the trees budded, and the whole world felt like it was waking up. The spring fair was held in the village square, with stalls selling food and crafts, musicians playing on a makeshift stage, and children running everywhere with sticky hands and bright laughter. Kade and Tarna were married in the afternoon, standing in front of the whole village with the priest reading the traditional words. Tarna wore a dress of deep blue that made her green skin glow, her hair braided with wildflowers. Kade wore his best shirt and pants clean and mended, and tried not to shake as he took her hands. Do you, Kade Brennan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The priest asked. I do, Kade said, and his voice barely shook at all. And do you, Tarna Greyrock, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, Tarna said, clear and strong. Then by the power vested in me by the church and the law, I pronounce you married. You may kiss. Kade kissed her, and the crowd cheered, and he felt like his heart might burst from happiness. The celebration lasted into the evening. There was food and music and dancing, and at some point, Kade found himself being congratulated by people who had looked at him with suspicion just a few months ago. The blacksmith clapped him on the shoulder and said something about Kade being a lucky man. The weaver's grandson, fully recovered from the fever, brought Tarna a bouquet of dandelions that she accepted with grave seriousness. When it was finally over, and they walked home in the twilight, Tarna was humming the song the musicians had played. Kade took her hand and she laced her fingers through his. Happy? He asked. Very, she said. You, more than I thought possible. They reached their cabin, and Tarna stopped to look at the sign she had hung months ago. Her name, painted in careful letters. Tarna Greyrock, Bone said her. I need to change that, she said. Why, wrong name now, Kade blinked. You want to take my name, if you do not mind. I do not mind at all. The next day they went to the village clerk's office. The same clerk who had registered Ven's false bonds, though he had been cleared of any wrongdoing in the investigation. He was a nervous man with ink-stained fingers, and he looked uncertain when they told him what they wanted. You want to register the marriage? He asked. Yes, Kade said. And you want to register a name change for Mrs. Brennan? Yes, Tarna said. The clerk pulled out a large leather-bound book, the official register of marriages and births and deaths for the region. He dipped his pen in ink and paused. Can you sign your name? He asked Tarna. Yes, she said. Then you will need to sign here, and here. He pointed to the lines in the register. Tarna took the pen and Kade watched as she carefully wrote out her new name in clear, precise letters. Tarna Brennan. She stared at it for a moment and then she smiled, bright and wide. There, she said. Official. They walked home hand in hand and Kade could not stop grinning. He had a wife. He had a partner. He had someone who chose to stay with him, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Life settled into a new rhythm. Tarna's practice grew. She started teaching a young girl from the village, the blacksmith's niece who had a steady hand and a good memory. Kade bought a plow horse finally, a sturdy mare named Daisy who was patient and reliable. With Daisy's help, the fields became more productive, and for the first time in years, Kade had enough harvest to sell a surplus at market. They were not rich, and they likely never would be. But they had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. A year passed, then two. Tarna's apprentice became skilled enough to handle simple cases on her own. Kade expanded the fields, planting a small orchard that would not bear fruit for years, but felt like an investment in a future he finally believed in. And then one morning in early spring, Tarna told him she was pregnant. Kade dropped the bucket he was carrying. Water sloshed everywhere, soaking his boots, but he did not care. You are sure? I am sure. He picked her up and spun her around, and she laughed and held onto his shoulders. Kade, put me down, I am going to be sick. He put her down immediately, looking panicked. Are you all right? Do you need to sit? Should I get? I am fine. It is just morning sickness, completely normal, right? Normal. He took a deep breath, trying to calm down. We are having a baby. We are having a baby, Tarna confirmed. Kade sat down hard on the ground, his legs suddenly weak. Tarna sat beside him, taking his hand. Are you happy? She asked. Happy does not even begin to cover it, Kade said. They told people slowly, wanting to keep it private for a little while. But word spread anyway, the way it always did in a small village. People brought gifts, advice. well wishes. The weaver made tiny clothes. The blacksmith built a cradle. Tarna worked through most of the pregnancy, only stopping in the last few weeks when she got too tired to stand for long periods. Her apprentice took over most of the daily work, coming to Tarna with questions and learning to trust her own judgment. The baby came in the middle of autumn, on a day when the leaves were turning gold and the air smelled like smoke and apples. Kade was banished from the room while Tarna labored, which he thought was deeply unfair since he was her husband and should be allowed to help. The midwife disagreed, so he paced outside and tried not to imagine all the things that could go wrong. It felt like hours. It probably was hours. And then he heard a thin, ready wail, and the midwife opened the door with a smile. "You have a son," she said. Kade stumbled into the room. Tarna was propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted and absolutely radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft cloth. She looked up when Kade came in, and her smile made his chest tight. "Come meet your son," she said. Kade crossed to the bed on shaking legs. Tarna shifted the bundle so he could see the baby's face. He was small and wrinkled, with a fuzz of dark hair and eyes that were trying to focus. His skin was a pale green, lighter than Tarna's but definitely not human. His ears were slightly pointed. "He is perfect," Kade whispered. "You want to hold him. I am going to drop him." "You are not going to drop him." She passed the baby over, and Kade held his son for the first time. The baby made a small sound, not quite a cry, and Kade's heart melted completely. "Hello," he said softly. "I am your father. I am going to do my best not to mess this up." Tarna laughed, tired and happy. What should we name him? They had talked about names, but had not settled on anything. Kade looked down at the baby in his arms, at the tiny fists and the serious expression, and said, "Connor, if that is all right with you." "Connor," Tarna repeated. "Kade Brennan, I like it." Connor opened his eyes, dark and curious, and looked up at Kade like he was the most interesting thing in the world. Kade felt something shift in his chest, a love so fierce and immediate it almost hurt. "I am going to keep you safe," he promised. "Both of you, no matter what." Tarna reached out and took his hand. "I know." The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry. Connor was a fussy baby, prone to crying at odd hours and refusing to sleep unless someone was holding him. Kade and Tarna took turns, stumbling through the days in an exhausted haze, but there were good moments too. The first time Connor smiled, the first time he laughed, a bright gurgling sound that made them both stop and stare in wonder. The way he would grab Kade's finger with his tiny hand and hold on tight. "He is going to be strong," Tarna said one evening, watching Connor wave his fists in the air. "He gets that from you," Kade said, "and stubborn. Definitely gets that from you." "I am not stubborn." "You once argued with a fence post because it was crooked." "It was very crooked. It was a safety hazard." Tarna laughed and leaned against him, and they watched their son together in the firelight. The village accepted Connor the way they had accepted Tarna, slowly and with some reluctance, but eventually. The children were curious about his pointed ears and green skin, but children were curious about everything. The adults were more cautious, but when Connor smiled at them with his gummy grin, most of them softened. There were still some who disapproved, who muttered about half-breeds and unnatural unions. Kade heard the whispers and felt the anger rise in his chest, but Tarna always stopped him before he could do something stupid. "Let them talk," she said. "Words cannot hurt us unless we let them." I do not want Connor growing up hearing that. Then we teach him to be strong, to know his worth. To understand that some people will always be small-minded, and that is their problem, not his. She was right, of course. She usually was. So Kade focused on his family, on making sure Tarna and Connor had everything they needed, and let the rest of the world think what it wanted. Connor grew. He learned to sit up, to crawl, to pull himself standing on the furniture. He said his first word, which was "da," and Kade nearly cried. He took his first steps on a spring morning, wobbling across the room to Tarna's outstretched arms. "He is going to be running soon," Tarna said, catching him before he fell, and climbing, and getting into everything, just like his father. "I do not climb things. You climbed onto the roof last week to fix the shingles. That is different, that was practical." She smiled and kissed him, and Connor made a disgusted sound and pushed them apart with his small hands. They laughed, and Kade thought about how lucky he was, how improbable this whole life was. He had gone to an auction to buy a horse. He had come home with a woman he loved more than breathing and a son who was the best parts of both of them. He had a home, a family, a future. He had everything he never knew he needed. The years passed. Connor grew into a bright, curious boy who asked 1,000 questions and never sat still. Tarna taught him about healing, and he learned to identify herbs and mix simple remedies. Kade taught him about farming, and Connor loved working in the fields with Daisy, feeding her carrots and brushing her coat until it shone. They had more children. A second son, born 3 years after Connor, who they named Bennett. He was quieter than his brother, more thoughtful, with Tarna's steady temperament and Kade's stubborn streak. The boys fought like wildcats sometimes, but they also looked out for each other with a fierce loyalty that made Kade proud. The farm prospered. Kade's orchard started producing fruit, and Tarna's practice became known throughout the region. People traveled from far away to see her, bringing payment in coin and goods. They built a larger house, with room for the boys and a proper workspace for Tarna. Kade never bought another horse at auction. He did not need to. Daisy served them well for many years, and when she got too old to work, they retired her to the pasture and bought a younger horse from a breeder Kade trusted. Sometimes, late at night when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Kade would think about that day in the village square. The auctioneer's gavel, the scraps of paper blowing in the wind, Tarna's face when he tore up the indenture. "You ever regret it?" Tarna asked him once late one night. "Regret what?" "Everything. Buying me, fighting for me, all the trouble it brought." Kade rolled over to look at her. Even after years of marriage, she could still take his breath away. "Not for a single second. You gave up a lot." "I gained everything that matters." She smiled and moved closer, tucking herself against his side. "I love you, Kade Brennan." "I love you too, Tarna Brennan." Outside, the wind rustled through the orchard. Inside, their children slept safe and warm, and Kade held his wife and thought about all the ways his life had turned out better than he ever could have planned. He had been looking for a horse that day at the auction. What he found was so much more. He found love and family, and a future he never dared to dream of. And he would do it all again, every impossible moment, just to end up exactly where he was. Years later, when Connor was grown and apprenticed to a proper physician in the next county, when Bennett was running the farm with his own ideas about crop rotation and soil management, Kade and Tarna sat on the porch of their house and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "We did all right, did we not?" Tarna said. "Better than all right," Kade said. "The boys turned out well." "They did. Connor is going to be a better healer than either of us, and Bennett is already growing more per acre than I ever managed. They got your stubbornness. And your brains, thank goodness." She laughed and took his hand. Her fingers were the same as they had been 20 years ago, strong and steady, calloused from work but gentle when they needed to be. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me. For choosing me. For giving me a life I never thought I could have." "You gave me the same thing," Kade said. "More than the same thing, you gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour. In the barn, the horses settled for the night. The world kept turning, steady and sure. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Tarna asked. "When I asked where I should go, I told you that you were free, that you could go anywhere, and I asked you where, and you invited me here. Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Tarna corrected. "The best was tearing up those papers." "Fair point." She leaned her head on his shoulder and Kade wrapped an arm around her. They had built this life together, piece by piece, choice by choice. It had not been easy. There had been hard times and lean winters and people who disapproved and obstacles that seemed impossible. But they had made it. Together. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear. Kade thought about the road that had brought them here, about all the ways things could have gone differently. About the fact that he had been looking for a horse and found a wife instead. About the way Tarna had chosen to stay, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. About the family they had built and the life they had made and the love that had sustained them through everything. "I would do it all again," he said quietly. "So would I," Tarna said. "Every moment." They sat together as the darkness gathered, warm and safe and whole, and watched the stars come out one by one above the home they had made together.